They thought firing me would be the end of it. They forgot one small detail: my name was the condition for the system to exist. One click and $4.3 billion evaporated. They replaced me with someone who couldn't tell the difference between biometric authentication and a bank PIN. I didn't sabotage their system. I just let it demonstrate who really needed whom. My name is Emily Rayburn. For nearly a decade, I was the chief systems architect at Verity Edge Technologies and the sole creator of what became known as the Sentinel Framework, a $4.3 billion biometric authentication system used by multiple national security agencies. Today, I run my own company worth billions. But 6 months ago, I was being escorted out of the building by security while carrying a cardboard box containing my desk plants and a framed PhD diploma from Stanford. I'm not a vindictive person by nature. I'm a builder, not a destroyer. But sometimes, the most powerful lesson comes not from what you actively do, but from what you allow to naturally unfold when people make catastrophic misjudgments. This is the story of how I designed the most secure authentication framework in government history, how the company I helped build decided I was expendable, and how one automated security protocol changed the fortune of everyone involved. I should start at the beginning. 11 years ago, I was finishing my PhD in distributed security architecture at Stanford. My dissertation focused on creating self-regulating security systems that could adapt to threats without human intervention, while most of my peers were being courted by Google, Amazon, and the usual Silicon Valley suspects. I was approached by a tiny startup operating out of a converted warehouse in Oakland. Verity Edge Technologies had only 15 employees at the time. The founder, Marcus Green, had a vision for creating next-generation security systems for critical infrastructure. He didn't have the budget of the tech giants, but what he offered instead was freedom, the chance to build something revolutionary from the ground up with minimal bureaucratic interference. "We don't need another social media algorithm or advertisement targeting system," Marcus told me during our first meeting. "We need systems that protect what matters." I was sold. 2 weeks after defending my dissertation, I became employee number 16 at Verity Edge, with the grandiose title of Chief Systems Architect, which, at that stage, meant I was the only systems architect. My first 6 months were a blur of 18-hour days and endless cups of bitter coffee. I built the initial framework of what would eventually become Sentinel. Back then, we called it Project Asimov, after one of my favorite science fiction authors. In fact, many of the original code libraries and classes still bear names from classic sci-fi Hari Foundation, Trantor, Terminus, little Easter eggs hidden in a system that would eventually protect national security interests. Marcus was the perfect founder for a technical founder to work with. He understood enough about the technology to appreciate its complexity, but trusted me implicitly with architectural decisions. When I insisted that we build in fail-safes that might seem paranoid to outsiders, he backed me without question. "If you think we need it, he would say. "I didn't hire you to build something that just looks secure." By year 3, Verity Edge had grown to 50 employees, and our security frameworks were being adopted by several Fortune 500 companies for their internal systems. We were profitable, growing steadily, and most importantly, building technology that mattered. Our systems had already prevented several major breach attempts at client organizations. Then came the government contract that would change everything. The Department of Homeland Security had been struggling with disparate security systems across multiple agencies. They needed a unified biometric authentication framework that could work across the FBI, CIA, Border Protection, and a dozen other agencies while maintaining rigorous security standards and compliance with various regulatory requirements. The contract was worth $4.3 billion over 10 years. The bidding process was brutally competitive. Giants like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Palantir were all contenders. Verity Edge, with just over 50 employees, was the smallest company in consideration by orders of magnitude. But we had one advantage: Sentinel. The evolution of my original framework was already more advanced than anything our competitors had. While they were proposing to build solutions from scratch, We already had a working framework that could be adapted to the government's requirements. The day we won the contract remains one of the proudest moments of my life. Marcus called an all-hands meeting, opened a bottle of champagne that cost more than our first server, and made a toast. To Emily Rayburn, he said, whose brilliance made this possible. The contract had an unusual stipulation. After reviewing the technical documentation, the government security team had been so impressed with the architecture that they insisted on naming me personally as the chief systems architect in the contract language. This meant that any significant modifications to the core authentication protocols would require dual authentication approval from both the government's security team and from me personally. At the time, I thought this was merely a vote of confidence. I didn't realize it would eventually become the linchpin of everything that followed. The next 2 years were the best of my professional life. We expanded to over 200 employees. We moved from our Oakland warehouse to a gleaming office in San Francisco's financial district. Sentinel was being implemented across government agencies, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. For the first time in history, these agencies had a unified authentication system that was both highly secure and adaptable to their specific needs. Then Marcus got sick. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late. Within 6 months, he was gone. His family inherited his controlling stake in the company, but they had no interest in running a technology firm. They sold to Blackstone Capital, a private equity firm that specialized in optimizing tech companies for maximum profit. The changes were immediate and jarring. Blackstone installed Victoria Hensley as the new CEO. Victoria had an MBA from Harvard and a resume full of successful corporate restructurings, which seemed to primarily involve cutting costs and maximizing short-term profits at the expense of long-term innovation. In our first meeting, Victoria looked at me with the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes and said, "Emily, I'm so excited to work with you. Your technical expertise combined with my business acumen is going to take Verity Edge to new heights." I should have seen the warning signs when she used the phrase business acumen without irony. Within weeks, Victoria had brought in her own executive team. Most concerning was the appointment of Derek Lang as Chief Technology Officer. Derek had previously been a digital transformation consultant at a major management consulting firm. His technical knowledge extended to using PowerPoint and knowing enough buzzwords to sound knowledgeable to other non-technical executives. In our first one-on-one meeting, Derek asked me to explain Sentinel's core architecture. I spent 2 hours walking him through the distributed authentication protocols, the self-healing security layers, and the biometric verification systems. He nodded at appropriate intervals, but his eyes glazed over whenever I delved into technical specifics. At the end of my explanation, his only question was, "But how do we make it AI-enhanced clients love AI?" I tried to explain that Sentinel already used several machine learning algorithms for anomaly detection and adaptive security responses, but that adding AI for marketing purposes would be meaningless without specific use cases. "Let's put together a roadmap for AI integration," he said, ignoring my explanation entirely. "I'm thinking we call it Sentinel AI Plus for the next government pitch." This was my first glimpse of the fundamental disconnect that would eventually lead to disaster. To Derek and Victoria, Sentinel wasn't a carefully crafted security architecture. It was a product to be repackaged and marketed with whatever buzzwords were currently in vogue. Over the next few months, the company culture shifted dramatically. Technical decisions that once would have been made based on security and performance considerations were now made based on what would sound impressive in investor presentations. Longtime engineers began leaving, replaced by less experienced but less expensive new graduates. I tried to shield my core team from the worst of the corporate politics, focusing on maintaining the integrity of Sentinel as it was deployed across more government agencies. The system was performing exceptionally well, thwarting thousands of unauthorized access attempts daily and adapting to new threat patterns without human intervention. Despite the success of Sentinel, my relationship with the executive team grew increasingly strained. I refused to compromise on security features for the sake of faster deployment schedules. I pushed back when Derek suggested we streamline the authentication protocols to make them more user-friendly. The entire point of a high-security authentication system is that it's not supposed to be friendly to unauthorized users. I explained during one particularly heated meeting. Users complain about the three-factor authentication, Derek countered. It's hurting our satisfaction metrics. They're accessing classified government information, I said. The minor inconvenience of multi-factor authentication is a necessary trade-off for security. Victoria sided with Derek, as she always did. We need to be responsive to user feedback, Emily. Perhaps you're too close to the technical details to see the bigger picture. The irony of being told I couldn't see the bigger picture by people who couldn't tell a firewall from a fire drill was not lost on me. Despite these tensions, I remained committed to Sentinel. It wasn't just a project for me, it was my legacy. I had built it from the ground up, infused it with my philosophy of security, and watched it grow into a system that protected the nation's most sensitive information. I wasn't going to abandon it because of corporate politics. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. I arrived at the office to find a calendar invitation for an urgent strategic discussion with Victoria, Derek, and someone from HR named Melissa I had never met. The meeting was scheduled for 9:00 a.m., 10 minutes from when I received the invitation. As I walked to the conference room, I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. In my experience, any meeting that includes someone from HR and is scheduled with minimal notice is rarely good news. Victoria and Derek were already seated when I arrived, along with a woman I presumed was Melissa. None of them were smiling. Emily, please have a seat, Victoria said, gesturing to the chair across from them. Her voice had the practiced neutrality of someone who had delivered bad news many times before. I'll stand, thanks, I replied, suddenly unwilling to put myself in the symbolically subordinate position they had arranged. Victoria's smile tightened slightly. As you wish, Emily. As part of our ongoing strategic restructuring, we've been reviewing all departments for optimization opportunities. The corporate euphemisms were flowing freely now. In my experience, strategic restructuring and optimization opportunities usually translated to, we're firing people to cut costs. After careful consideration, Victoria continued, we've decided to implement a decentralized technical authority model for the Sentinel project. This will involve redistributing architectural oversight across specialized teams rather than concentrating it under a single systems architect. It took me a moment to translate this from corporate speak to English. You're firing me, I said flatly. Derek leaned forward. We prefer to think of it as evolving the organizational structure to better align with industry best practices for distributed development. I looked at him with genuine curiosity. Do you practice saying things that meaningless, or does it come naturally? Melissa from HR cleared her throat. Emily, we understand this is difficult news. We've prepared a generous separation package that includes 6 months of severance pay and extended health benefits. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. You do realize that the government contract specifically names me as the chief systems architect responsible for Sentinel's core protocols. Right. It's not just a title, it's a contractual obligation. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Our legal team has reviewed the contract. We'll be submitting documentation to update the responsible parties to reflect our new team structure. It's a simple administrative change. I stared at her, genuinely astonished by the depth of misunderstanding. It's not an administrative change. The dual authentication requirement means that any significant modifications to Sentinel's core protocols require my personal approval, along with approval from the government security team. Derek rolled his eyes. That's just bureaucratic language. We can update the authentication permissions in the system. And there it was the fundamental misunderstanding that would cost them billions. Derek thought the dual authentication requirement was simply a matter of user permissions that could be changed in a settings menu. He didn't understand that it was embedded in the very architecture of Sentinel, a deliberate security feature I had designed to prevent exactly this kind of uninformed meddling. I could have explained it to them. I could have warned them of the cascade of security protocols that would activate once my authentication was removed from the system. But as I looked at their faces, Victoria's cold calculation, Derek's smug ignorance, Melissa's practiced neutrality, I made a decision. Let them find out for themselves. I see, I said simply. When do you want me to leave? Victoria seemed relieved by my apparent acceptance. Today would be best for a clean transition. Melissa will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings, and IT will meet you there to transfer any necessary passwords and access credentials. I nodded. One question: who exactly is taking over my architectural responsibilities? We've assembled a team of engineers who collectively understand the Sentinel architecture, Derek said. Plus, we're bringing in consultants from NetSphere to help with the transition. NetSphere was a consulting firm known for body shopping mediocre engineers at premium rates. The fact that Derek thought a random assortment of consultants could replace someone who had built a system from scratch told me everything I needed to know about his technical judgment. Good luck with that, I said, and turned to leave. Emily, Victoria called after me. I hope there are no hard feelings. This is simply a business decision. I paused at the door and looked back at her. No hard feelings at all. I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing how this business decision plays out for you. Melissa escorted me to my desk, where a young IT technician was waiting nervously. He asked me for various passwords and access credentials, which I provided accurately and completely. I had no intention of sabotaging the system or making their lives difficult through petty actions. I didn't need to. The system would do that all by itself. As I packed my plants, photos, and personal items into a cardboard box, I felt surprisingly calm. There was a certain inevitability to what would happen next, like watching a car driving toward a cliff in slow motion. I could have shouted warnings, but the driver had made it abundantly clear they weren't interested in listening. On my way out, I stopped by the desks of my core team members to say goodbye. The news of my departure had already spread, and many looked shocked and concerned. What's going to happen to Sentinel-based Maya, my lead security engineer? Exactly what it was designed to do, I replied cryptically. By noon, I was back in my apartment, the cardboard box sitting on my kitchen counter. I made myself a cup of tea and opened my personal laptop. I didn't need to access any Verity Edge systems to know what would be happening. I had designed Sentinel security protocols. I knew exactly how they would respond to the removal of one of the two required authentication authorities. The first signs would already be appearing. Subtle at first, slightly longer processing times for authentication requests as the system ran additional verification checks. By tomorrow, any attempt to modify the core protocols would trigger security exceptions. Within a week, the system would begin to reject new biometric enrollments. Sentinel wasn't failing or being sabotaged. It was functioning exactly as designed, protecting itself from unauthorized modifications by gradually restricting functionality until proper authentication protocols were restored. I took a sip of my tea and began drafting my resume, though I was in no hurry to find a new position. My severance package was generous, and I had always lived well below my means. I could take a year off if I wanted to, but I suspected I wouldn't need nearly that long. The first call came 3 days later. It was Maya, calling from her personal phone during her lunch break. Everything's falling apart, she said without preamble. The system is throwing security exceptions for every attempted modification. Derek brought in the NetSphere consultants, and they're completely lost. They keep trying to override the security protocols, which just triggers more exceptions. That sounds stressful, I said neutrally. Emily, they don't understand the architecture at all. Derek keeps demanding that we just fix it, but no one knows how to bypass the dual authentication requirements. Has anyone tried contacting the government security team? I asked, already knowing the answer. Derek says we need to solve it internally before involving the client. He's afraid they'll invoke penalty clauses in the contract if they find out we can't modify our own system. I smiled to myself. Derek was right to be afraid. The contract included substantial penalties for security breaches or system unavailability. What he didn't understand was that removing me without government approval was already a violation of the contract's terms. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, I told Maya sincerely, but I'm sure Derek and his team of consultants will figure it out eventually. We both knew they wouldn't. A week after my departure, the first major issue occurred. A planned update to the facial recognition components failed to deploy across the network of government agencies. Instead, the system reverted to its previous version and generated an incident report for the government security team, flagging the update attempt as a potential security breach. 2 days later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Dr. Rayburn, this is Commander Thomas West from the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Division. My heartbeat quickened slightly. I'd worked with the government security team during Sentinel's implementation, but Commander West was new to me. Hello, Commander. What can I do for you? I'm calling regarding some concerning security alerts from the Sentinel system. Our team has received multiple incident reports flagging unauthorized modification attempts. According to our records, these modifications lack the required dual authentication. Specifically, they're missing your authorization. I'm no longer with Verity Edge, I explained. I was let go as part of a strategic restructuring last week. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Dr. Rayburn, were we notified of this personnel change? Not by me, I said. I assumed Verity Edge would handle any required notifications. Another pause, longer this time. Dr. Rayburn, the contract explicitly names you as the Chief Systems Architect responsible for Sentinel's core protocols. Any change to that arrangement requires formal approval from our security team, which was not requested or granted. I understand, I said. I brought this to Verity Edge's attention during my termination meeting, but they seemed to believe it was a simple administrative matter that could be resolved internally. I heard Commander West take a deep breath. This is not a simple administrative matter. It's a potential breach of contract and security protocol. I'll need to escalate this immediately. Of course, I said. I'm happy to cooperate in any way needed. After hanging up, I smiled to myself. The dominoes were beginning to fall. 2 weeks after my departure, the situation at Verity Edge was reaching a crisis point. Maya continued to provide updates, each more dire than the last. The system was now rejecting all modification attempts. New user enrollments were failing. Government agencies were lodging formal complaints about system degradation. Derek had finally been forced to contact the government security team, only to discover they were already aware of the issues and conducting their own investigation into Verity Edge's contract compliance. Then came the call I had been expecting. Emily, this is Victoria Hensley. Her voice lacked the confident smoothness I remembered. She sounded tired and stressed. Hello, Victoria. What can I do for you? We need to discuss your return to Verity Edge, she said, coming straight to the point. The Sentinel system is experiencing some technical issues that require your expertise. I allowed myself a small smile. Technical issues. From what I understand, the system is functioning exactly as designed. It's detecting unauthorized modification attempts and protecting itself accordingly. Emily, please. Victoria's voice took on a pleading tone I'd never heard from her before. We're facing significant penalties for system degradation. The government is threatening to invoke the contract's security breach clauses. That sounds like a challenging business situation, I said, echoing her words from our last meeting. But I'm not sure how it involves me. As you said, you've assembled a team of engineers and consultants who collectively understand the Sentinel architecture. We both know that's not true, Victoria said, abandoning all pretense. You built Sentinel. You're the only one who fully understands its security architecture. We need you back. As an employee, I asked. As a consultant, Victoria said quickly, we're prepared to offer a very generous consulting rate. How generous? Victoria named a figure that made me raise my eyebrows. $10,000 per hour, with a minimum engagement of 50 hours. That's certainly generous, I acknowledged. But I'm afraid I'm not interested in consulting for Verity Edge. Name your price, Victoria said desperately. Whatever you want. It's not about the money, Victoria. It's about respect for the work I've done and the systems I've built. You and Derek treated Sentinel like a product that could be modified at will by anyone with a computer science degree. You didn't understand what you were tampering with. We made a mistake, Victoria admitted. We should have consulted you before making organizational changes. But surely you don't want to see Sentinel fail. This system protects national security interests. I don't want to see Sentinel fail. I agreed. Which is why I've already been in discussions with Commander West and his team about potential solutions. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. What kind of solutions? Victoria finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Solutions that ensure the continued security and functionality of Sentinel under proper technical oversight. I said, I've submitted a proposal to establish a new company, Rayburn Integrity Solutions, that would assume responsibility for Sentinel's maintenance and development under a direct contract with the Department of Homeland Security. You're stealing our contract, Victoria said, anger replacing desperation in her voice. No, Victoria. You breached the contract when you removed me without government approval. I'm simply offering a solution that preserves the security system I built. This is corporate sabotage. We'll sue you for every penny you have. I sighed. Victoria, I haven't accessed a single Verity Edge system since my departure. I haven't modified any code or interfered with any operations. I simply provided information when contacted by the government security team and offered a solution when asked. There's nothing to sue me for. You built in this authentication requirement deliberately, she accused. You designed the system to fail if you were removed. I designed the system to require dual authentication for all critical modifications. I corrected her. This is a standard security practice for high-value systems. The government security team not only approved this design, but insisted on it. The fact that you didn't understand this fundamental aspect of Sentinel's architecture is exactly why the dual authentication was necessary in the first place. Victoria hung up without another word. 3 weeks after my departure, Commander West called again. Dr. Rayburn, I wanted to update you on our situation. After reviewing Verity Edge's contract compliance and their handling of the current system issues, we've determined that they're in material breach of the security provisions. We're initiating procedures to terminate the contract. I had expected this, but hearing it confirmed still sent a jolt through me. A $4.3 billion contract, terminated. What happens to Sentinel? I asked, genuinely concerned about the system I had built. That's why I'm calling. Our security team has reviewed your proposal for Rayburn Integrity Solutions. We're prepared to offer a direct contract for the continued maintenance and development of Sentinel, pending standard government procurement procedures. My breath caught. That's extraordinary news, Commander. Not really, he said matter-of-factly. You built the system. You understand it better than anyone. From a national security perspective, contracting directly with you is the logical solution. 2 days later, I received the formal contract proposal. The value was $2.9 billion over 8 years, less than the original Verity Edge contract, but still an astronomical sum for a company that currently consisted of just me. I immediately reached out to Maya and several other key team members who had worked on Sentinel at Verity Edge. All of them agreed to join Rayburn Integrity Solutions without hesitation. Many had already been looking for new positions as Verity Edge's situation deteriorated. Within a month, Rayburn Integrity Solutions had 28 employees, all former Verity Edge engineers who had worked on Sentinel and a signed government contract worth $2.9 billion. We leased a modest office space in Oakland, not far from where Verity Edge had started. As for Verity Edge, the termination of the government contract was catastrophic. Their stock price collapsed, investors fled. Victoria and Derek both resigned under pressure. 6 weeks after my departure, what remained of the company was sold to a competitor for pennies on the dollar. I felt no satisfaction in Verity Edge's demise. Many good people had lost their jobs because of Victoria and Derek's mismanagement, but I did feel vindicated. The system I had built had protected itself exactly as designed, and now it would continue to serve its purpose under proper technical oversight. 3 months after establishing Rayburn Integrity Solutions, I was invited to speak at the National Cybersecurity Conference. My talk was titled Architectural Integrity in Critical Systems, but everyone knew it was really about the Verity Edge incident, which had become something of a legend in security circles. As I stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces, I thought about everything that had happened and what lessons could be learned. A truly secure system, I began, protects against all threats, not just those from outside, but also those from within. It must be resilient against not only those who wish to break in, but also those who, through ignorance or arrogance, would undermine its integrity from positions of authority. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. I didn't design Sentinel to fail if I was removed, I continued. I designed it to require proper authentication for all critical modifications, a standard security practice that the government rightfully insisted upon. The system didn't collapse, it protected itself from unauthorized changes, exactly as it was designed to do. I paused, collecting my thoughts. The real failure wasn't technical, it was human. It was a failure to understand that security isn't just a feature you add to a product or a box you check on a compliance form. It's a philosophy that must inform every aspect of a system's design and management. I looked out at the audience, meeting their eyes. Never build a system where one person's departure can cause collapse unless that person is the only one who truly understands how to protect it. And if you find yourself in a position of authority over such a system, take the time to understand it before you start making changes. The most dangerous threats to security often come not from malicious hackers, but from well-intentioned ignorance in the executive suite. The applause was thunderous. As I stepped down from the podium, I felt a sense of closure. The system I had built was secure, not just from external threats, but from internal mismanagement. The team I had assembled understood and respected its architecture, and perhaps most importantly, a powerful lesson had been learned about the true meaning of security in critical systems. I didn't shut down their system with one click. I didn't need to. I simply built it well enough that when they made a catastrophic mistake, it shut itself down, protecting the very values it was designed to uphold. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about what you do after you're wronged. It's about what you did long before, creating something so true to its purpose that it cannot be corrupted, even by those who claim to own it. My name is Emily Rayburn, and I built a system that knew its own worth even when its owners forgot mine.